Welcome to today's global hour-long automotive broadcast. Today's webinar is a joint one between two TechWorks communities, AESIN and the IoT Security Foundation. Now, please bear with me today if I don't sound quite myself. I'm a bit under the weather with a heavy cold, so I'm going to try and get through this as best I can today. Whilst we're waiting for everyone to arrive, I'd like to let you know about the TechWorks Engineering Trustworthy AI initiative. We did an AI webinar this past summer and followed it up with a London workshop. Now, earlier this month, a new paper was published summarizing key findings on 18 perspectives for wider consideration for members of the TechWorks communities, including AESIN and the IoT Security Foundation. If you're watching this broadcast live, you can click on the link, which I'll put in the Zoom chat facility in a few moments. And if you're watching the recording of this webinar, please go to techworks.org.uk/AI, where you can download the new paper and look out for details of the next AI event being announced this next week. Our first guest today joins us from California. He is speaking to us from his plush hotel room, which overlooks a Tesla factory. He is Lee Harrison of Siemens, and he is going to be presenting to us today on software-defined vehicles. After Lee, we'll also hear from Paul Wooderson of Horiba Mira, who will present on hardware security. But now we cross over to Fremont in San Francisco Bay. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Right, so welcome everybody. Let me just get my presentation up. Okay, so the session today, as you know, is talking about the emergence of software-defined vehicles. So what I'm going to talk about in the next 20 minutes is really what is a software-defined vehicle? What does that mean for automotive designers, manufacturers? What are the implications on the electronic hardware that goes into those vehicles? And what do we have to do to make sure that when we're developing these new software-defined vehicles, how do we make them safe, secure, and make sure that they're as reliable as possible? So let me start off by just kind of doing a bit of a trek through history so we can understand exactly what a software-defined vehicle is and how that differs from the vehicles that we're used to today and the overall evolution of cars and how we got there. So if we start off with what we would call vehicle 1.0, so this is everybody's kind of very familiar with the basic car as we know it, that would typically have very simplistic electronics in. It certainly wouldn't be connected. And the electronics in the vehicle was really built on a budget. It wasn't the key kind of value add in the vehicle at all. Then we saw the emergence of more and more electronic content within the design, within the vehicle. And a lot of these features were based around adding convenience to the user and the driver. So you started to see technologies such as sat-nav guidance systems, infotainment systems, and we started to see vehicles getting connected. But primarily this connectivity was aimed at effectively adding a safety net to the vehicle. So if the vehicle was to break down or you were to have an accident, you would have a means to call for help. And that was about the level of the connectivity within the vehicle. If we move to where we are roughly today, so vehicle 3.0, today we see cars where there is an increasing number of features and applications within the electronics content within the vehicle. And there's a willingness to pay for all of this premium technology. So we're now seeing vehicles that are more and more connected, not just from a safety perspective, but from an entertainment perspective, and the ability to leverage a lot of these kind of new features. And then we come on to what's being called the software-defined vehicle. And here we end up with a vehicle that is, it's not just a fixed set of features and capabilities. It's a very dynamic platform, so you can really mold and fit the vehicle to your own personal preferences and lifestyle. And a lot of the features that can be added to this software-based platform can even be delivered in a subscription-based model. So a lot of the features can be paid for on a monthly basis. So, for example, you could do things like pay a monthly subscription to get heated seats during the winter, but then you don't need to pay for those during the summer. So it's a very, very flexible platform. And connectivity is an extremely important part of that overall new platform and development. So that's kind of where we've come from and where we're heading. And if we look at how that really impacts the architecture of the vehicle, if we talk about, let's say, the design cycle of vehicles in kind of yesterday, the hardware and the software would be developed together, and then you'd reach a point where the production of the vehicle would start, and the development of those elements would stop, and then it would be kind of fixed in time. But with the software-defined vehicle, what we find is the hardware gets complete, but the software can be continuously developed throughout the whole life cycle of the vehicle. So essentially, you can have a vehicle where, as you own it, there's more and more features and capabilities being added to that vehicle throughout its life. And that's achieved essentially by, instead of having an architecture within the vehicle that is made up of many, many different ECUs with their own individual functionality, we bring all of the compute power and the delivery of those features into a central compute engine. And this kind of varies a little bit between vehicle architectures. It could be completely central, or we could have I think terminology is a zonal implementation where there's maybe 2 or 3 different compute engines within the design. But what we're essentially doing is centralizing the hardware, and then that hardware can support a lot more flexibility in terms of the software content. And what we see in terms of the hardware is that obviously, just by definition of the name, it's a software-defined vehicle. So unfortunately, there seems to be less attention paid to the hardware. But for a vehicle to be software-defined, it has to be silicon-enabled. So, and if we look at how the silicon and the compute elements of these vehicles is growing over time, you can see here in this graph, as you add all of these additional features and capabilities, the compute power required for that centralized hardware is still today growing exponentially. So, and we expect this to continue for quite some time. So in terms of the hardware, what we're seeing is the requirements are just kind of exploding in terms of the amount of compute power that's needed to drive these software-defined vehicles. What does this mean to the semiconductor industry? Well, here you see a couple of trend lines. The blue trend line is essentially the overall trend in terms of technology node for the leading edge technology in the semiconductor industry. The red line is historically where the automotive industry has sat. And as you can see, back in the kind of early 2000s, the trend for the automotive industry was really to focus on the more mature technologies that brought with them kind of less risk, less cost, and were more than capable of supporting the requirements of the electronics that were going into the vehicles. However, if you look at where we are today, and this graph is a couple of years out of date, we actually have now reached that crossover point where the automotive industry is now driving the leading edge semiconductor technology requirements. So the automotive industry is really driving that leading edge development from a semiconductor perspective, which just in its nature brings a whole bunch of challenges in terms of, like I say, in the past, there was a reliance on maturity. Now the silicon that's going into vehicles is very leading edge. So with that comes a certain amount of risk that we have to try and mitigate, because obviously we still want our vehicles to be 100% safe. So when we're designing ICs, semiconductors for automotive applications, what do we have to think about? So first of all, testability. We want to make sure that the ICs that go into the vehicles are 100% defect free. And the terminology used in the industry is essentially zero defect. So if you're to deliver electronic components into the automotive industry and there are defects and there's a recall that's needed, we all know that a recall for an automotive OEM is a huge cost. So there's a real effort to make sure that silicon that goes into vehicles is essentially defect free. And the terminology we use here is zero defect. And what that means in essence is you'll never achieve zero defects, but we're looking at achieving a target of less than one defect per million devices. And even now that's changed and it's now a billion devices. So really in a delivery of a billion chips, we want less than one of them to be have defects in. So it's a pretty tall ask in terms of quality. Then we have the safety. So in all parts of the vehicle development and automotive, we're all familiar with the various standards to make sure that we're able to detect when faults and defects occur within the vehicle. And if something's going to fail, we need to make sure it fails in a safe state. And then security. Security is becoming more and more important. And as you can imagine, with the amount of software content and features and capabilities being added, the attack space for security is just exploding. So security is a huge topic in the automotive space, and it's a real challenge to get to a point where we cover that attack landscape. And then SLM, lifecycle management. So this is really being able to monitor the various aspects of the silicon throughout the vehicle's life cycle. So making sure that it continues to work as expected. And as with everything else, silicon ages. You're probably used to your mobile phones, your PCs. They all start to get a bit cranky once they get a few years in, and the silicon will age, and it does have an end life. So really making sure that we monitor that and we know when things are going to fail, to make sure that we do preventative maintenance and to make sure that everything's done in a safe and secure way. So by no means developing that hardware that supports the software-defined vehicle, it's not a trivial task. And if we look into some of those elements, so we talked about advanced test techniques, and here's just an example of some of the type of defects that we try and target within the silicon. So here we're talking about really detailed, right down in the depths of the transistors within the silicon itself, looking for kind of opens and short circuits and bridges within the actual silicon itself, and not just faults that are obvious and prevalent when you initially test the device, but defects that could emerge in the early use. So what we try and do is we try and stress the devices during our testing to make sure if there's a defect that's kind of, it's there, but it's not affecting the overall functionality of the device. Initially, we stress the device to make sure that those defects manifest themselves, so we don't see those in the early life of the vehicle. And then we have safety. So I say everybody's probably familiar with the ISO 26262. It really looks out for two parts of the IC development. So you've got the systematic faults. So these are faults that could potentially be introduced during the design manufacture phase. And then most importantly, you've got the detection of random faults. So these are the faults that occur throughout the life cycle of the vehicle, and they could be caused by any number of things, but it's really important to have the mechanisms within the silicon and the semiconductor to be able to detect those faults when they occur, and not just to be able to detect them, but also make sure that once we have detected them, we can take the appropriate action, and if the device is going to fail, we make sure it fails in a safe way. We also have the safety of the intended function. So this is a little bit different in terms of, this is really checking to make sure that the device is being used for what it was actually intended for. So it's quite easy to leverage technology that's designed for one thing and use it in a scenario that it maybe was never intended to be used for. So here we look at that aspect of it and make sure that the vehicle is being used within the bounds of what the technology was initially specified for. And then, like I said, the real challenge in today's development is the ISO 21434, which really looks out for these malicious faults that are coming through cybersecurity attacks, and all of those aspects of the attack surface within the overall system. So what do we do in the world of security to be able to make sure we can detect these type of attacks on the electronic systems, the electronic hardware within the vehicle? So here is a kind of a simplified illustration of the sort of technology that can be used. So the green boxes there, kind of in the middle, are the various functions in, say, a compute subsystem. So you've got CPUs, you've got memories, you've got bus controllers, and then around that, we insert a whole bunch of different monitoring technology. So at the top, you've got things like bus monitors, instruction tracing, status monitors, and these passively monitor the operation of the device. And what we're really looking for here is when the device starts to operate outside of its regular profile. So As you can imagine, with a compute subsystem running a predefined set of software, we know exactly what the profile of that software looks like. So we've got a very good understanding of the sort of transactions we should be seeing, the amount of transactions we should be seeing. So one of the big things in terms of cyber attacks is when there's an attack on the vehicle, especially from the software perspective, we see a lot of anomalies appear in terms of how the compute engine within the vehicle is operating. So these can be detected by these monitors. And then we've got another set of monitors that are down the bottom, which are referred to as sentries. And these, whereas the other monitors are kind of passive monitoring, collecting data, the sentry monitors are really there, and they can be proactive. So, for example, if we see kind of illegal accesses to buses or memory, the sentry devices can actually block that activity there and then. So they can be very proactive and mitigate very quickly. Like I say, very low latency here because these monitors are built into the hardware and they sit right next to the subsystems that they're monitoring. So in terms of the ability to detect and mitigate, practically zero latency. So there's a whole range of things we can do within the hardware to detect and mitigate against these type of cyber attacks. And then obviously with everything, we're all connected now. So one thing we can do with the monitors, the data that we collect, we can extract from the silicon and we can put up into the cloud. And once we've got data from a fleet of vehicles, we can do a whole lot of smart analysis on that and start to use AI to really look at the overall trends of what's happening out there in the world. So with that, let me kind of let's take a bit of a journey and kind of try and show how this technology kind of works in a real life example. So we would take our friend here. He's happy. He's going to work. He's got his software-defined vehicle. So at the start of the journey, he'll start up his vehicle. We do key on. As part of the key on, we do an initial system test. So this is using the inbuilt system test technology, and it will structurally test the silicon to make sure it's defect free. We do that in a very, very quick manner to make sure that you're not sat there waiting for 15 minutes for the vehicle to test itself before you can drive, but be rest assured that we do enough testing on the silicon to make sure it's safe to start your journey. So off we go. And our friend here today, he likes the fact he's got a software-defined vehicle. He's got all these personal settings and preferences linked to application on his phone. His phone's connected to the infotainment system of the car. But the night before, he's been playing around. He's installed some new apps on his phone. And what he doesn't realize is one of those applications has a bit of a Trojan horse in it. So once the phone is connected to the infotainment system on the car, the Trojan horse that's now been installed on his mobile phone through the infotainment system, which sits on the vehicle bus, now has access to the whole periphery of the vehicle, all of the different elements within the car. So the cyber attacker that goes in through the Trojan horse that's in the phone app can now start doing lots of malicious things to the various elements in the vehicle. So the app, like I say, now has access to the CAN bus. The CAN bus controls the braking and the steering elements within the vehicle. So the vehicle is now potentially at risk. However, when the Trojan horse that's found its way into the vehicle attempts to try and access the memory of these critical systems. What you see when you monitor that really detailed level of the vehicle infrastructure is you see access of the memory, for example, say the braking system, being requested by the infotainment system. So is that a legal transaction? Well, in normal operation, you would never expect the infotainment system of the vehicle to want to go and access the memory within the braking system. So our on-chip monitor detects these communications and it knows that's not expected, knows that's an illegal transaction. So with that, it mitigates those transactions and will block them. So, so none of those requests from the infotainment system to access the memory around the braking system get through. So the attack is mitigated, and we're able to collect that data and we're able to send that up to the cloud. So we've got record of the sort of attacks that are occurring. So for our passenger, another happy, uneventful trip to work, completely unaware of what's gone on throughout the situation. And that's the way we like to see it. So we want to make sure that, like I say, the passengers and within the vehicle aren't affected by these types of incidents. So just talking about what we're doing within Siemens. So Siemens has an extremely wide range of technology that both on the manufacturing side, the functional safety side, the in-life monitoring, management and security. And we like to think that all of these elements of test, safety and security is really kind of embedded in our DNA and the way that we do things. So let's look at where we're going in the future. So software-defined vehicles are really starting to kind of become the next technology, the next level of kind of vehicle technology that's coming. But always remember, the software is only as good as the hardware it's built upon. So the hardware is really the cornerstone of everything that builds up a software-defined vehicle. And as more and more features and functionality get added to the software, the requirements around that hardware continue to explode in terms of the compute performance that's required. And as you know, with your phone and your PC, there's never a decrease in terms of hardware requirement. The hardware requirements are always increasing. And then especially when vehicles and safety are paramount, safety and security are really fundamental to the overall development of these software defined vehicles. So really critically important when we're developing the overall hardware for these vehicles of the future. So with that, I'll wrap up and just say one last thing. If the technologies you've seen just a glimpse of today are of interest, we've just published a very nice ebook that can be found on the Siemens website that goes into a lot of details for each of these different technology areas. So if you're interested, go take a look, drop me a line, and yeah, we can have a more detailed discussion. Thank you very much.
Lee of Siemens over in San Francisco Bay, thank you very much indeed. Before we hear from our next speaker, just to let you know that the next AESIN Tech Talk will be on Wednesday, the 20th of March, with Dan Fowler of Warwick University. The talk will be Project Res Auto, assessing capability enhanced microprocessors for future cyber resilient automotive systems. The next webinar from the IoT Security Foundation will be on Thursday, the 28th of March. The first confirmed guest for that one is Ken Munro of Pentest Partners, who will present on aviation. If you're watching this live, the links to register for one or both of these upcoming broadcasts are in the Zoom chat facility. So we'll have a Q&A section soon. There's already plenty of questions coming in on the Zoom chat facility, but if you do have any questions, observations, comments, or whatever, do use the Zoom chat facility if you're watching this live, and we'll put those questions and comments to our speakers towards the end of the hour. Up next in this joint broadcast from AESIN and the IoT Security Foundation, it's Paul Wooderson of Horiba Mira, and he's going to be talking about hardware security. So now we cross over to England's Midlands. Paul, it's over to you, my friend.